So this one is a project that's not quite as far along as the last one, the change. So I really hope we can get more input here. And like Dan mentioned this morning, if you want to be involved in the notification committee, we've got basically a subcommittee looking at notifications and service-based notifications and things like that. Reach out to Corey. He can get you subscribed to that particular working group. It hasn't met in a little while, but we did start this off so that we did have some work done in order to be able to start the discussion. So one thing that I think is interesting, and I'll just kind of say this from the get-go, we started this project as one of our first process reengineering projects within the GlobalNOC. So we're doing a sort of a deeper look. We're not just looking at the tool, what does it do? We're looking at well, how does it do it? Why does it do it? And all of the sort of business process involved in that. So when we look at, general projects and their scope, maybe the process stays the same, maybe it doesn't. But in this particular case, we're looking at the tools and the process itself. So want to give a big shout out to the team, the process reengineering team. They have been hugely helpful with suggesting things that we could get done to really start this discussion about where GlobalNOC notifications need to go next. So all of their input was very helpful in getting to where we are, which is really, we've only been working on it for maybe a month and a half, something like that. So really just kind of getting going. Okay, so as far as the agenda, this agenda is a little bit lighter. I am going to walk us through some demos and such, but I did want to leave more room for discussion on this particular topic, especially since, the project still has legs and we haven't really scoped out all of the future phases of what we're going to do in this particular project. So first, we'll review kind of what are the current project objectives, where we stand on those, and then we'll do a little bit of discussion on future objectives. Hopefully that's lively and lots of people to participate, and then we will do a Q&A and wrap up after that. Okay, so this is a big long slide, but this is kind of the preview of what we're going to go through here. And this is sort of a laundry list of things that the process engineering team came up with when we were looking at, what would be good to do in regards to notification, and what are some of the quicker things that we might be able to actually get done and maybe be able to demo by GlobalNOC days. Be able to have in production relatively soon, or some of these quick wins so we can get some momentum with the project, and then, based on that momentum, keep the ball rolling. So we'll talk a little bit about improved notification text and signatures, the opt-in, opt-out for broadcast notifications, and the option for those broadcast notifications to leverage existing DB contact records. So that's a pretty interesting thing that we did there, and allows us to actually send individual messages on those broadcast notifications so that we can actually gather metrics on whether people are reading our notifications or not. And so that should help us inform, are we sending it to the right channel? Is it being heard? Is it being ignored? Where should we go with these things? We want to get to where we have an improved contact update process. I would say that's not in place now, but is going to be needed. Anything we do around contact data is, essentially how targeted and broadcast notifications are going to get better and more accurate who they send to. So keeping our contact data up to date is very important to this project. It's not a direct thing, but I would sort of put it as it needs to happen in parallel. Automated alarm correlation. So this is one of the super cool things I think that might not look that cool to many of you, but for those of you that have worked in the service desk, or those of you that have had to interact with alarms and then figure out based on the NIT tool what was actually affected, I think you'll really like this section. We'll do a little bit of a demo there, and then we'll talk about targeted service-based notifications. That's something that we have never had. We've always had sort of targeted circuit-based notifications, but we're looking to expand that into being able to do service-based notifications. So we'll go through an example of that as well. And then this is more just a general topic, but we've been working and talking about, what are some of the processes that really enable people to be successful in using, targeted notifications. Well, it really comes back to what is the quality of your data in the DB. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the ideas that we have around sharing some audit scripts and things like that that we can do to really kind of keep a heartbeat of the quality of our data in the database, because our notifications are only as good as that data.
Ryan, just as a heads up, you're sounding slightly robotic. I don't know if it's on me, on my side, or if everyone can hear that.
Let me unplug and replug.
All right.
Is that any better?
Yeah, it took out the robotic noise.
Okay, yeah, great. Let me know if it happens again. Okay, the exploring alternative notification channels, that isn't something that we've really talked about, but might be an interesting conversation to have today. And kind of tying this back into Dan's presentation, the status pages are those maybe yet another type of view into the way that people get information about the status of our services outside of notifications. Okay. So I'm going to jump onto this one first, and I can't take credit, but what I think you'll notice is on the left, we've got one of our existing notifications. I wasn't even able to fit the whole thing on a page. And, that's because there's a lot of information here you've got to really fill through: affected, description, task number, blah, blah, blah. So a whole bunch of stuff, basically. And so what we changed in this, and this was just kind of our first go at it, was we include the actual maintenance number, so whether it's a change or an incident, and then the short description here. And then we include the update, and this is going to be the update that they've got in terms of the notification text. And then one clever thing that I think Chris suggested about the times was, well, it's really, I'm more interested in the duration. So, can we look at the start time and the end time and actually see the duration of the change? So we were able to get that in, and then the affected assets. So kind of, rearranging these, reducing the number, moving some of the stuff like the timestamp and the message ID and stuff like that that we might need to reference, but the customer wouldn't care about down here and kind of out of their way. One other thing that you'll notice is we were able to incorporate social media. So for those of you customers who manage different social media for your organizations, we can embed the images for those and make them linkable to your Facebook or your Twitter or your YouTube or whatever else to help promote those channels for you guys. So just a bit more modern. Additionally, and you can't see it over here on this because the message was too darn big, we shortened the signature line. There was a whole bunch of contact and knock page info down below this where the phone is right now. And it really, didn't add value to, the notification in and of itself. So we took that out and came up with this look, which I think is a lot cleaner and a lot more effective at getting, all right, what is the current update on this, and then what are the affected times and what are the affected assets. So you're really kind of looking at the important bits right away in the message. So that was our first go at that. And again, thanks to Chris, he helped lead on that particular endeavor. So the next little feature that I want to talk about is something that I've heard expressed to me a few different times from a few different customers, and that's that, they get a lot of these notifications, right? So almost all of our networks use broadcast notifications and targeted. So if you're on one of those broadcast lists, the broadcast email list, then you're going to get basically a notification for every single change or incident. And it's like, well, maybe I care, maybe I don't care. So we thought it might be nice to enable an option for networks to allow for their participants who are on these notifications, the broadcast notifications, to be able to unsubscribe. So I can't demo this. We did work on this particular code yesterday and somehow busted it. So I can't demo it right now, but basically, if you were to click this link, it takes you to an unauthenticated page, but it knows it's you based on the URL in this link and allows you to manage your broadcast email subscriptions. And those broadcast email subscriptions are essentially managed in the database based on contact roles. So once they do that, and one of the things that's kind of a bummer with this way of doing it, which is very common, you see this type of thing in a lot of emails these days, is that, if you were to forward a message on, somebody could have clicked that link and, potentially unsubscribed you. So little check that we added was if a user does an unsubscribe, we're going to send them a message to confirm that unsubscription and allow them directly from that email to resubscribe if they didn't intend to unsubscribe. So sort of check and balance on that. Okay, so just kind of showing a little bit about how this was put together, and I could take you out.
Brian, we got
Yep.
sorry, we got one question here from Adam Nemethy before you get going.
Yeah.
He said, will that be descriptive so people know what they are unsubscribing? Meaning that could be the only way to get notifications and may not realize they won't get more specific ones either.
Yeah, so one thing that we did when we were collecting all of the different notification lists, Adam, that we used was we worked with the SSTs to know which types of things were sent to which list. So when we get to, for example, NOAA, you guys are going to have many different mailing lists, whereas with Karen and SOX, we only had one mailing list that we were using to send notifications. So that's why we started with them, because their case is a little bit simpler. So we need to be able to put descriptive information there when they go to that confirmation page to unsubscribe, so that they know what they won't be receiving. Does that make
Perfect.
sense, Adam?
Yeah, we get a lot of people that uninstall happen, like we want to be getting notifications, and depending on what list they get added to, right, they may get on the broadcast list, and then next week they get a notification that doesn't apply to them, like I unsubscribe, and it'd be like a cat and mouse game back and forth, right? Like now I'm not getting notifications. Well, that's because you took yourself off the main list
Yeah.
that you were on.
Yep. And to be fair, you know, this is an option for you as a customer of ours to consider. It's not mandatory that you enable the unsubscribe from your broadcast list. So that is a feature that we've added to the notification tool, is to allow unsubscribe, but really it can only be unsubscribe from the ones that are essentially these contact role managed lists. And so what I did to prep for this demo, which I can't do because the unsubscribe doesn't work, is I added these two contact roles to my contact record in the GlobalNOC database. So I am now going to receive email notifications from Karen and email notifications from SOX. And so I'm on their broadcast list essentially at this point. If I click that link on the previous page, I would be able to see these two and be able to say I want to get out of one or I want to get out of both. So the contact roles in this case were created to essentially replicate the subscription lists, which had been done primarily in listservs. But we already have to maintain contacts already, and listservs have a habit of kind of getting out of date and you know, a little bit overloaded sometimes, and they don't always get updated if somebody leaves, those kind of things. So we thought moving them along with doing some contact, you know, cleanup work, but moving those, you know, contact roles into the database would put more of the information right there in the DB and make it more easily accessible. So the contacts associated with these particular roles, in this case, would receive individual broadcast notifications. And because they're receiving individual broadcast notifications, we can actually track, we can use a hidden image, which is pretty common technique to actually track who is reading our notifications. So if they actually read the message, then it's going to load an image unless they have their email client set to not load remote content, which some people do. And it'll basically, whenever that retrieves, we're going to record in a log that this particular message has been opened, so that we can see, all right, well, we know this message went out to 77 people. It got opened 3 times. Is that a good success rate, or should it be higher? You know, what can we learn from that? And we've never been able to do that because when we send to a listserv, it would always be the same. So the one downside there, and this is true with any of those tracker images, is that it is remote content. So if you use an email client that you have set up to by default block remote content, unless you allow it, it's not going to be able to capture that you've read that. So it's not perfect, but it is better than what we're able to get today. Okay, so just talking a little bit on the contact update process. We have a contact update tool. It hasn't been used a lot since circa 2016, 2015. And we have had to use it in a couple cases where we really needed to make sure our contact data was up to date. But I think, you know, one of the things that's kind of a side important thing to this particular project is our notifications are only as good as the contacts that we send them to. So having a review of how we do the contact update, whether or not we use this tool or whether we want to implement some other process for doing contact updates, we need something to make sure that we're keeping our contacts up to date at a fairly regular interval to make sure that we are targeting the right people for these messages. Okay, so this is the automated alarm to affected correlation, and I think this is probably, in my mind, one of the coolest, and it kind of gets at doing the system integration talk. If you heard my talk earlier about ServiceNow, what we're doing in this case is we've built a button. So we've got this Find Affected button, and this button lives on the incident, okay? So what happens whenever this button is clicked is assume that the incident already had some alarms act to it. Then we can basically go out, we can talk to AlertMon, say, hey, what alerts are act to me? And we can get that information back. And then we can take that information, parse it out, and send it off to the network impact tool and say, hey, based on here what we know from the affected assets in AlertMon, tell me what the impact is on the network, and in this case, even services. So we've started adding that functionality, really just in one small use case right now, but we'll be growing that over time. And then in an automatic way, and this is the part that I think is really exciting for the NOC and potentially for all of us in terms of turnaround time, if we're able to populate these affected fields in a much quicker automated fashion, we can get out targeted notifications much more quickly to our customers. So timely information is very important when it comes to these networks. So if we can reduce the time that the service desk has to sit there and go back and forth between NIT and the incident, figuring out everything that's affected and automate part of that, then we win in terms of time that they have to spend before they can send out that initial notification. Yes, this thing is down, we're working on it, et cetera, et cetera. So in this particular case, we added the Find Affected button to the incident. So the service desk primarily is the one that interacts with incidents. So they're probably the only one that'll get excited about this. But like I said, for all the rest of us, we should be getting our notifications more promptly and more accurately, hopefully.
Another thing to mention there, maybe Brian, is also makes it easier for us to do targeted notifications on the things that we're able to make these connections for.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Thanks, Luke. So the whole populating of these affected fields, what we do whenever we actually generate the notifications, and I'll walk through this, is we will go ahead and traverse the DB and we'll try to get to where we've identified the entities that are affected, and then typically people target either the primary technical contact, or if they're using role codes, they could be targeting whatever role code they wanted to, but basically being able to target notifications for just the assets that they're interested in and not the big laundry list that would go out in the broadcast notification. Okay, so basically I think we've talked through all of this. The end result is that we populate the affected fields on the incident, and that's the circuits, the nodes, and the services. So all those three types of things are being returned from the network impact tool at this point, and we can turn those into basically the affected fields, which then drive the notification tool. So now on to kind of the second part of this. So I've clicked that find affected, I've validated it. I'm a service desk technician, and now it's time to generate the outage notification. So from that same incident or change, we can click the generate notifications, and that's going to take us into the notification tool. The notification tool then takes and looks at the ticket information, specifically the affected fields, and this is where it gets into the targeted stuff. So if targeted is turned on for your network, it's going to find the affected circuits and tie those back to entities based on your circuit hierarchy, and then send to the appropriate contact type or contact role, depending on which you leverage. And then after it's made that association, it's going to preview for us essentially the messages that will go out and who they'll go out to. So I want to just take this through its paces real quick. So I want to grab this incident. Just get out of there so I can grab it. So I prepped this in the dev environment and it was all working. So let's hope it's still working. And just do some quick filtering here. Oh, it's because I'm in RON. Silly me. Why is that taking me back to RON? I may just have to refresh this thing. I'm not sure if it timed out or what. Yeah, it sure did. So unimpersonate Bobby. That I seem to be stuck as him for a second there. And go to the incident we intended. Okay, so this particular incident was created from an alarm. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go take a look at the alarm. Okay, so we should be able to come here and find the incident number. Okay, and we should be able to see the alarm that's associated with this. And in this particular case, it is a BGP service. And so that was what we targeted as our first service-based notification, was BGP services. So we were able to build that logic to derive the entities from the services and then the contacts. So this alarm has been acknowledged to the incident, and so that is tracked by AlertMon. So now we'll go back to here and we'll use this find affected button. Let me make sure all of our additional information is cleared out. So we've got this affected services field, affected circuits, and affected elements. So what's going to happen now when I click this find affected is what I showed you guys on a couple slides ago. It's going to go talk to AlertMon, grab the alert, and then it's going to send that information over to the NIT tool and find out the different affecteds. And I don't want to say that this is perfect at this point, but it's certainly working to some degree. We may need to fine tune it a bit. I think I want to be in I2. No affected circuits.
I think that would be expected if you're doing a BGP outage.
It should be finding affected services, though.
It should be finding affected services.
Services, yes, but probably not circuits.
Yep.
Not sure.
So let's just see here. This is act. That's good. Nathan, do you see anything that I'm doing wrong? I had just done this over lunch.
Is it already filled out, or does that not matter?
It's not. It's been emptied. But
Yeah, I'm not sure. It looks okay to me. I think it should just work. So I'm not sure what's going on at the moment.
okay. So anyway, what would happen ultimately, and I was really so excited to show this off. What a bummer. Live demos, right? So we would have had a set of affected services come in here based on that alarm, and I tracked some of that information over here in my notes. And one of those services was this guy. So this was one of the service records that was returned as an affected service. And what we can see here is that this particular service has a entity record, and the entity record has essentially several people on it. In this particular case, they notify the primary technical contact. So if I look for this in our notification tool, and thankfully I already have this up, so my demo is not totally busted, I can see that that person is going to actually get a affected notification based on this service. It's certainly not perfect yet. This is not, professional grade text or anything like that. But what is important is that there were 12 affected services that we were able to derive from that alarm information by going and taking the alarm information and automatically talking to NIT and then talking to the database to look up basically the entities associated with those services. So I know that's kind of a mouthful, but that gets us to being able to target notifications based on, BGP services. Whenever we look at other services, we're going to have to look at, how can we effectively target those? I don't think, that they'll all fit into the BGP paradigm, but that was the first one that was sort of our proof of concept work. And so at that point, I had, click the button. Let's assume it worked. I came out here to do my preview. I see that we're going to send 12 notifications. The very top one, well, really, actually, all of these are, I think, targeted in this particular case. And we could trace these back to NIT if we wanted to manually, and that was a step that Nathan had done for me to validate that we were doing the right correlation of data. And then I could come in. Yep.
So if I could jump in here, I know Adam, you asked a question about how the service was populated, and I think that Brian gave you an answer there. Did that address your questions? He kind of made that there naturally, but I just
Cool.
want to make sure.
I can go into a little more detail maybe. So what we're doing is basically the alarm, we're able to tell which BGP peer that is based on the alarm. And so we're basically able to join that alarm, the BGP peer in that alarm back with the BGP object in the database. And that BGP object would be associated with a service. That service would be associated with one or more entities of contacts. And so we connect all those together, and NID is the one that sort of pushes that affected service into the ticket based on the BGP peer in the database and the service it's associated with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does, and that helps. I was kind of curious about how you're correlating the service. So I get like the BGP relationship, but like how is it correlating the service to that, right? So that's what I'm kind of missing. Maybe we don't need to know that. I was just kind of curious on that part.
So basically, for each type of alarm, we've got to figure out how to correlate that back to some object in the database. And in this case, it's a BGP alarm, and so we know that that needs to correlate back to a BGP object in the database. And then we'll have a service related to whatever that BGP peering is supported, documented in the database that's linked to that BGP object. And so that linkage from alarm to BGP object in the database to service in the database. The unique part there for the BGP service and alarm is that linkage between the BGP alarm and the BGP object in the database. So for every type of alarm we want to support for this, we have to figure out what is that linkage between the alarm type and some object in the database that we can link back to a service.
Yeah, Luke, you said that better than I could have. Yeah, the real key is, getting down to the service in this case, which is the magic of that logic that Luke just described, and then from there, being able to pull the entities and then the appropriate contacts from the entities to target for that particular type of notification.
And we started with BGP peers because we get a lot of BGP peer alarms instead of a lot of notifications, and that object's in the database and pretty easy to link. The next step is to expand this to more alarm types and make those same linkages.
Yep. Thanks for the assist there, Luke. I appreciate that. Did that help answer, Adam?
Yeah, still bouncing around some things in my head, but I get the premise of what you're talking about. And I guess if I don't want to take up too much time and get too deep, but maybe one follow-up question would be in the order of operations, I guess to say. So would you like have a service, would you have services created in the database, right? And then as you add like BGP peers, you add them to that service, that kind of like the order of operations? It's not dynamically linking, right? It's like something that's set when you create a new BGP peer or whatnot.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
I think one thing to add here too is with the automation stuff, right? Like there'll be some amount of being able to add a service, just the service type, and then once you specify that, we'll use the service configuration system or the intent system, whatever you want to call it, to actually push that configuration out, and then have another part that populates that back into the service description itself. So if you're wondering how the service record actually gets filled out, for those using the GlobalNOC automation suite, I think that we'll be providing that whole life cycle.
Okay,
Yeah, that's a really good tie-in, AJ. Thanks for chiming in. That brings a lot of our different presentations together, right? All of this work kind of ties back together, right? So updating, keeping the database up to date, and some of the automation stuff that AJ's working on might make the population of these services, in your case, Adam, and I know your specifics maybe a little bit easier. So looking at, more automation type approach to getting these generated and the right entities associated and things like that is certainly something that we can look at.
Yeah, there's a ton of nuance to this because there's a lot to be said for the automated part of it, and we're looking into that, but we also want to give people potentially the ability to like some individual may want a particular service that's scoped very tightly, like there's just a couple of peerings that they care about. So giving people flexibility and not entirely relying. So we want to do automation where it makes sense, but still giving people flexibility to scope their notifications to what they personally want.
Yeah, some networks use services to keep track of who's actually, using and should be paying for a particular service. I know that's something that Ocean does, and because I'm their liaison, I know that. So their service information is already pretty well built out in the database for them. But that's something that they had built out by hand, more the way that David is talking about, because they're being billed for those particular services, right? Okay, so without getting too much into the weeds and the services, I'll try to get us back to instance. I'm going to try one last time to do the find affected, because it's such a cool button when it works. Oh, I think it's working because it's taken a while. Here we go. All right, so based on this alert out here, it took all that information, and I'm not 100% sure that all of what's in here is actually correct, but what it did was it filled in affected services, and one of these happened to be the one that I had looked up, this one right here, and that was IS, whichever number, I2 S186 461. So we can see that was this one, and that ultimately then tied to this entity, and then that particular contact who was in the notification. So we were able to show it, just not the first time. Thanks, Nathan, if you fixed that on the fly. I appreciate that. Okay, so back to our slides. Okay, so we just ran through basically these two, which is, running the find affected, which did the talking to AlertMon, out to network impact, and then populated the affected fields. Then we went to generate notifications. Notification tool pulled the data from the ticket, talked to the DB, figured out the appropriate contacts based on the entities associated, and was then ready to send notifications to those specific targeted people. Okay, so this is something we actually talked about on Monday with our process improvement group, and I think it's really, kind of center to, having good notifications. And Chris had brought this up again. Chris had a really good idea, and so, one of the things that's going to be really important is to be able to make sure that our data is correctly associated in the database so that we can actually do these notifications. So, do all the services that should have entities, for example. That could be a check script. So one of the things that we've been talking about is, and this is kind of inspired by our, what I'll call first software super user, who's Molly Bayless, who works with the Internet 2 team. She's wrote a whole bunch of automated jobs that run nightly or weekly that basically do an audit of the Internet 2 data. And what that does for them, it'll point out any consistencies or incorrect relations, and it gives them the opportunity to go then take the corrective action and get the data quality back up to where it's needed, right? So really, all this is saying here is, through audit scripts and defining those, and they'll be slightly different for everybody, but I think a lot of sharing could happen as well. We would be able to improve the affected and the targeting accuracy when we're doing targeted notifications. So long-winded way of saying data quality matters. Okay, so one that is kind of open for discussion, we haven't really talked about it in the process reengineering team, but there's always talk about different notification channels. What are the channels that make sense for us to be doing notifications on? We do email notifications, and that's kind of the way that we've been, I think, since the original notification tool got written. But does that still make sense? Is it maybe one of several options? So I just listed out a few examples here, and others may have thoughts on, what appropriate channels are for our notifications. But, is text messaging maybe an option? Should that be a user option? Twitter, I don't personally use Twitter, but I think some people do. And a lot of you guys have the Twitter linked on your pages. So any tweets that, would go there. Slack notifications are something that people seem to always be talking about. Facebook posts, and, I had to throw in the U.S. Postal Service, assuming we were rolling back 50 years, but that one's just a joke. So dry humor.
I mean, if you could send me a letter every time the network goes down, that would be kind of impressive, honestly.
Timely information, right? We'll get that notification to you in 2 days. That would be pretty useless. So does anybody have any other ideas in terms of channels? Like, should we allow for the user to manage how they receive notifications, their preference? Should it be managed by the network, and there's just one way and the network decides? Should it be some combination? So that's really a topic that we haven't covered too much yet, but I think probably needs to be covered, even if we decide in the end that maybe emails should still be the default. I think it's at least worth looking at channels, since we're doing kind of a full process review. So any thoughts there? Just pause for a moment.
I would say that it's always great to have more options, right? Email would probably be the standard one, but I can think of, depending on how deep it would go and how much difference you would allow, basically, would be like some people on their core nodes, right, that are very important. They'd want a text message because they may not, they may miss an email, but a text they'll get sooner. So I could think in our environment of a few different nodes that would be helpful. We already have on call for those, but just to make sure that I'm seeing that right away. So I definitely see some areas there, but again, it's how granular you get, right? Then I'd have to say, hey, for these nodes, if there's an alarm, can you send me a text? I don't know if you'd get that granular. So
yeah, well, that is the kind of thing we should be thinking about. And certainly, there are cases where, certain alarms are more important than others, for sure, right?
There's also, so for things where you're down to like specific services, there's some crossover between this and some of the work that we're doing on the monitoring side, where we want to have automated actions based on specific alarm conditions. So a lot of that was unlocked by the classification project that we do. So there's there may be opportunities there as well. If there's something very, very tightly focused, that doesn't really come under the, there wouldn't be a case for, like scheduled maintenances or things like that. But if there's something that you really, really want to keep an eye on, then there's the potential for automated actions there.
If I can
Yeah,
throw
I wonder
out
how we got out of giving a top on that. That sounds really cool, David. Automated actions.
Well, we know that's a little ways out yet. So maybe maybe next time.
Next time. That sounds great.
One of the things that I've heard from quite a few people, and I think that some of them had to drop off for conflicts, but some networks are interested in having, I know that earlier we talked about the portals and a status page, but having something that pushed to like a running list, like if you go look at like Slack status page, they have like a running log of updates that have gone out to the community for big events, so if you click on, like Slack, like say they lose ability to send DMs, they'll have like a running log of the updates that have gone out about that.
So that's kind of when I was talking about the portals, that's one of the things I really wanted to see if we could explore was something like, say, that RSS feed, because then you get that sort of baked in it's kind of the right style for that, and people could subscribe to it or just see it there.
Yeah, and we already do have some RSS feed capabilities, certainly around change, and I think even incident too. So Dan, you can get with me on that. But I do want to link back to Dan's earlier presentation. If you guys missed it, he gave a really good talk on some of the work he's doing around portals. And I just wanted to tie this in here because I think it's related. You know, how do people, you know, become aware of service degradation and outage, that kind of thing? Email, you know, that's what we've been doing. You know, one thing that I think was really clever that Dan stood up was this sort of services based, you know, red, yellow, green kind of indicator on services. And so, you know, could something like this, you know, be a complementary piece to notifications as well, right? So they're separate efforts, but I think a lot of it gets at the same thing, which is I just want to know what's up with my service, right? You can send it to me in a notification, but I should also be able to go somewhere and see the most up-to-date information about it, maybe on a dashboard, something like this. So I took this basically right from Dan's deck. Thank you, Dan, for that. So I did want to touch there on his presentation because I think the two are certainly related.
And that example, that status page, if you were to click something there, would you get like more information? So sometimes in a major outage, right, people will be contacting the NOC for updates more regularly, but you know, if there was a page, like you're saying, right, like a status page, they NOC could still answer those requests, but say, hey, there's also a status page where you're getting real-time updates. Is that like the same as this would do?
I don't think it's there today, and I'll let Dane answer for sure in case I'm wrong. But I think that was what he was referring to in terms of the RSS feed, where we would get updates to these particular services on the service portal. So
yeah, well,
Dan,
the idea was that this view, like what Brian has up on the screen right now, would be the actual observed runtime state according to alert on, right? It doesn't really have a concept of history, at least the way it's laid out right here. Something like the RSS feed would provide that mechanism, and maybe it would be derived from the alarms, but I'm thinking it's probably more sensible to be derived from something that's higher level, like say ticketing or something like that, and that would allow us to do, or some sort of announcements feed or a combination, right? I think there's a lot of options to explore here that would provide that scroll back ability.
yeah, so I think the answer is not today, but it's already being thought about. And if you've got any ideas there, you know, be certain to send them our way. Okay, so in terms of future objectives, we kind of did a couple quick sprints to get this to where you guys could see that we were doing some work on it. I think that work has been good work, but bringing this to GlobalNOC Days, one of the real reasons was we want to engage the community and make sure that we're working on the things that you guys would value the most. So just quick, if we want to have discussion here, or if you feel more comfortable just reaching out to Corey and becoming part of the notification committee, that's fine. If you would like any things that we potentially missed, we've got 5 minutes, I think, here for Q&A.
And this is our last presentation, so if we can go past that 5 minutes if we need to. If we don't want to stop this conversation. This is important information for us to get.
I guess I will speak again. I learned, I feel like I tried to stay up to date with the tools, but I definitely saw tools in here that were really interesting. I mean, some of the stuff we've known a little bit about, like the status pages, but seeing it there was interesting. The portal pages, I think we're very interested in. We kind of do one-offs. We'll and David is all too well aware of this. If a customer asks for like some Grafana graph or something, we'll ask systems, they'll build that graph and send it to them. So we do like a lot of, shouldn't say a lot of, but when a customer asks that, it's a one-off by like this portal page. And if they don't get that, then they're just kind of using the old snap. So I think that there's definitely use there. And with I like the marketing part of that. That was one complaint that we had sometimes would be that users go to a page and they see the Indiana University messaging and they think they're in the wrong place because they don't necessarily realize that that service is being provided to NOAA from there. So even with some of the off pages. So there was a lot of other things, but those in particular, I think really stood out for me and kind of more of a capability than I realized was there and interested in seeing more.
Excellent. Any other things in terms of notifications, things we're missing? Any ideas this maybe generated for pain points that any of you have around notifications? Okay, well, I think that then concludes my presentation. Sorry you guys had to listen to me for 2 straight hours. Hopefully most of what I said made sense there and didn't put you to sleep. So thanks for being a good audience.